result in a book, because we haven't quite nailed down the model. We've nailed down the ideas, but the issue is very complex, and the model that you need is, there's a variety there's a variety of models that you could use and haven't settled yet. Hold on. So the idea is to study corruption and rent-seeking and see how they're connected or not connected with growth. So we think of corruption as official misbehavior, and rent-seeking as private misbehavior. So these are two dominant types of anti-growth behavior. Both of these things are going to have a deleterious impact on growth. So we want to define what they are. We want to kind of think where they come from, because we observe different amounts of corruption and seeking in different societies. So we want to know where they come from. They come from people, some people have a comparative advantage in rent-seeking behavior, and being rent seekers. Do they come from weak institutions? Do they come from, I don't know, the presence of cultural factors? How big are they? Nobody's going to report their income from rent-seeking or corruption. Can we find through our models a particular observable variable that's a good proxy for income from corruption or income from rent-seeking? And then the important question is this one here: how much do they hurt productivity and growth? We have lots of examples of corrupt societies growing and honest societies not growing, so it's not obvious which way the correlation goes. Is corruption something that perhaps affects measured total factor productivity or labor productivity? And then there's this thing here, this question down here, which is a fool's errand. Can we think of institutions and politics and growth as all being endogenous variables in a grand model? And the answer is, yeah, you can keep on dreaming, but anyway. We all know what corruption is in the popular press, so we don't need to go over that, to conserve some time. And we know that in the literature, the names are rent-seeking, appropriation, extraction, etc., etc. So this kind of corruption typically means this thing here, the illegal use of public office for private gain. And then, of course, there is rent-seeking, which is simply the irregular distribution of income through bribes and even extortion, racketeering of the distribution of private income from one household or group of people to another household or group of people, not including the government. And you can think of the mafia as being a wonderful example of this. Okay, so here we're going to look at corruption and rent-seeking as occupation choices. We're going to live in a fantastic world where nobody's punished for being corrupt, okay, except loss of income. So you can fail as a rent seeker, or the person that you're trying to extract something from may manage to fend you off, but that's the maximum extent of your loss. We're not going to put you in jail, we're not going to shoot you, we're not going to do any of those things. So it's an occupational choice. You know what the incomes are, you know what the risks are. You can be corrupt, you can be honest, you can be a rent seeker, you can be a producer, you can be a good guy, you can be a bad guy, and it's all something that's a matter of occupational choice. Whatever works for you, right? That's what we're going to do. So we're going to let people make rational decisions, roughly decisions that under perfect capital markets, maximize their life cycle income. So whatever maximizes your life cycle income is going to be your occupational choice, modulo something that goes beyond individual considerations, that will allow people, when they look at the payoff, for this payoff not just to be life cycle income, but also to be influenced by social norms. In other words, what does society expect of you? You could, in principle, make a very large income by being a member of the mafia. But if your brothers will not break bread with you, or your mother will not talk to you, there's something that you have to take into account. So it's not just your payoff is not just your private income, but your private income plus something about interactions with society, which impose a tax on you if you deviate too much from social norms. So you can have societies that are completely individualistic, where people don't care about norms. That's one extreme. Okay? You maximize life cycle income and that's it. And or at the other end, you can be in a society where norms are extremely important, okay? And they impose an externality on you. And you deviate from these norms even slightly, the negative externality is too large. So in other words, you've got to do what society tells you to do. And these two extremes are two very different societies. An individualist society behaves like a standard growth model. And a traditionalist society behaves very much differently from a growth model. So, in particular, what's going to be the main result here is something very simple, which actually I don't need to give you 108 slides. But I would like to torture you, so I'll do that too. So the main idea is very, very simple. In an individual society, the outcome of the growth process depends very much on the political choice of norms. If somehow you manage to push through society good norms, good institutions, strong property rights, if society decides to go for strong property rights, then society goes for growth. Things are going to be good. If not, not. And then the interesting thing is, which societies decide to go for good institutions, or under what circumstances do we go this way or that way? So it's a question of politics and growth. This is simple. At the other extreme, where social norms are very important, where there are strong externalities or social interactions, institutions are not important. It's because you don't have much freedom of choice. Because the norms are very important, because you cannot deviate. You can think of this as a collectivist society or an oppressive society, call it whatever you like. Because the penalty from deviating from what's expected of you is so large, you will do what's expected of you. And what's expected of you is a norm that's defined from the past. Okay? Traditionalism. In this particular case, institutions don't matter very much, and in extreme cases, they don't matter at all. What matters is your past. So this is like a poverty trap. If you have a bad past, if your norms are anti-growth, you're condemned. You're a prisoner of your past. A good past guarantees a good future. Bad past guarantees a bad future. And even if you could break out of the past in these societies, you can only do so by an enormous change in institutions. So by strengthening property rights, for instance, enormously, to raise the rate of return on productive activity. But that turns out to be politically very difficult. So if you're going to say that I'm going to change institutions from very weak defense of property rights to very strong, or vice versa, or in the other direction, that's going to be politically very hard because there's going to be lots of political reaction against it. So basically you have, these are the basic results, and I'm going to spend the rest of the time torturing you, okay? All right. So institutions here are going to be chosen collectively. So institutions are chosen through a political process. And I have to write down something about the political process. And I'm not a very good political scientist. Okay, that's not my comparative advantage. So the way I'm going to model it is that there's always going to be a binary choice. Population is going to vote over two alternatives. One is a status quo, which, if you think about trying to reform the French economy or the Italian economy, you know that the status quo is very important. So one of them is going to be the status quo. The other is some reform proposal that the political system throws up every so often. So Renzi comes as a prime minister and says, I want this, and he doesn't get it. What the political system throws up as a reform depends on who controls the agenda. And that's kind of a complicated thing. In order for me to avoid it, I will assume that the political system throws up a random reform proposal every period. So if proposals can be thought of as a distribution on the interval 0, 1, we pick a random number in the interval 0, 1 and throw it up. Okay? And that's the reform proposal. On the other hand, there's a status quo. The institutions we inherited from the past. So we vote over those two, and if we obtain a supermajority, we can change the status quo. Without a supermajority, we cannot change the status quo, which actually makes in equilibrium difficult to pass reform proposals, but not impossible. So this is going to be the politics. It's going to be very simple. Okay, so let's keep going. We have until, what, 10:30? Yeah. Okay, good. Fine. So there's going to be norms. A norm is going to be a parameter in the interval 0, 1. So 0 is going to be, we don't tolerate corruption at all, and 1 is going to be, we don't tolerate honesty at all. Norms may or may not be important. There's going to be a cultural parameter sigma here, this one. In 0 infinity or 0, 1, it doesn't really matter, which captures the strength of social interactions. So sigma 0 means you live in an individual society, so whatever norms there are, we don't give a damn about them, okay? We look after number 1. And if sigma is the largest value, could be infinity or 1, then it means that norms are all important. So the way you think about it is basically that there is an implied tax rate. Okay, every time you deviate from the norm, so you take a decision on rho, and rho is going to be the fraction of individuals, or the fraction of the time individuals are going to spend rent seeking. So rho 0 means no rent seeking, okay? And rho 1 means all the time you're a rent seeker, full-time rent seeker, okay? So every time you deviate from the norm, you pay a tax, and the tax is the distance, your distance from the norm times sigma, okay? So sigma is like a tax rate. So if sigma is large, deviations from the norms are punished severely in terms of your mother doesn't talk to you. Okay. If sigma is close to 0, then, okay. So this is going to be, the other thing is going to be a property rights or institutional parameter, theta. This is going to be endogenous. This is exogenous, this is endogenous. This is going to be endogenous. So politics is going to decide this parameter. And this is a property rights parameter which defines the ratio of enforcement personnel to rent seekers. In this society, some people are going to choose to be rent seekers. And society is going to try to control rent seekers. Think of them as mafia, thieves. We have cops. And the institution is this. how many cops do we put on the street for every mafia member that we know exists? So there can be no tolerance of crime, in which case this theta is large here. So if theta, there's an upper bound on theta, and if you put out one cop for each thief, crime vanishes. Okay. Now remember, you're not fixing the number of cops on the street. You're fixing how strongly you react to the presence of antisocial behavior. Okay? So I can have this policy. Well, the other extreme is theta equals 0. I don't care. You go do whatever you want. Okay? We are not fixing the total number of cops. So if you're in a society where everybody's an angel, okay, where there's no crime, there's no cops. But this choice will have a deterrent effect on people's calculations. Do I want to be a rent seeker or do I want to be a producer? So if you say, for every thief I'm going to put a cop out, then when I decide whether I want to be an honest person or a thief, I will take that into account. Because if there are lots of cops per thief, then perhaps my chances of getting a good income as a thief just went down. Okay. So I don't need to tell you very much about the correlation between GDP per capita and corruption. Here we need to get much better data, more sophisticated data. But there's a strong correlation. So if you look at Transparency International qualitative indices of corruption, they're strongly correlated with GDP. It would be nicer, and the next version there's going to be a scatter plot of some sort, show this correlation. So does corruption limit GDP? This is a debate in development economics, which I'm not going to go into. I think it's those who are aligned on the side that says corruption limits GDP are overwhelmingly stronger than the others, even though some arguments to be made in the other direction. But the bottom line is this, that corruption and rent-seeking are redistributive activities. They're not productive activities. So to the extent that the society decides to spend a lot of labor and capital either engaging in rent-seeking or trying to deter rent-seeking, okay? To the same extent, society does not allow these people to go into production and increase GNP. So here, basically, it's corruption is going to be a redistributive activity that hurts GDP. So it's socially inefficient for many reasons. First of all, strong deterrence would destroy corruption without spending any actual resources. You would say that for every thief I have 10 cops out there, and that kills crime, and it costs you nothing, because nobody will choose to be a thief, and therefore you need no cops. Everybody's a producer, so total income is going to go up. Gainers can afford to compensate the losers, and our only problem is everybody will be better off if adequately compensated. And that's going to be a big if in this model, because we will not have a mechanism for compensating the losers. We could say, look, you guys are mafia workers, I know you're kids from the Italian South, you're not very well educated. If you were to do honest work, you get €1,000 a month, which means you kind of be hungry. And now you're in the mafia, you make €3,000 a month, and you live comfortably. So what we're going to do is we're going to let you go and find honest work, and we're going to give you 2 extra thousand. We're going to compensate you. And if we do that, then the honest citizens will be up in arms saying, my God, you paying these mafia guys 2 extra thousand out of my taxes? No. So this is the underlying assumption, that you don't have a mechanism for compensating the losers, and that's the source of all the problems. So reforms will be vetoed by the uncompensated people who have some comparative advantage in rent-seeking. So the labor unions, I don't want to put the labor unions together with the mafia, but there's lots of social strata that are going to lose from reforms, okay? And the vote for various politicians And I'm not going to identify those politicians either. All right, so they're going to be vetoed. Fine. So why do we tolerate corruption? It's because primarily, there are lots of stories in the literature, but primarily it's going to be that because it's not easy to get broad-based agreement that reforms are in order. Reforms get proposed. The French government, the Italian government have voted many reforms in the countries, but not, or the Greek government for that matter, but very little has been implemented. Okay? So one thing we want to explain is why do we see good institutions persisting? The world, if you look at, I should have given you a serial correlation of Transparency International numbers for all the countries. And what we know from anecdotal observation is that the well-governed countries of today were well-governed 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And in the British case, it goes back a long, long time. Okay? Also, the badly governed countries have very persistent politics. That doesn't mean things don't change. Singapore improved the quality of its governance in the 60s, and various countries in kind of Mediterranean Europe that will remain unnamed also allowed their Transparency International scores to drop precipitously in the last 20 years. And the same countries have had very bad growth experiences. Perhaps it's just a coincidence. Surveys, etc. There's a huge literature here, both on the economic side and on the kind of social, cultural norm side, habit side, trust side of this. There's papers that are referred to in these notes and other important papers like Bizine and Verbier and some Abellini's work that are not. There's a large amount of theoretical models, the key ones being Grossman and Kim is one of them, Scaperdas is another, of that study the corruption, in particular, study rent-seeking. So these are models which are kind of mostly temporal, some growth models. And when we talk about rent-seeking, it's typically modeled as a game between a predator and her prey. So there's a person who has income, a person who wants to gain that income or steal it, and the predator invests in offensive weapons, and the prey invests in defensive weapons, and then the probability that the income changes hands from the predator to the prey depends on these two investments, okay? And the play is game. And so this is typically a situation where the predation is private, there's no government involved in these early models, and then defense is also private. There's no police involved. So there's a kind of lots of papers in this literature. So here we're going to, here we're going to do it slightly differently. The rent-seeking is going to be private, corruption is going to be public, the defense against both is going to be completely public. So you cannot hire private cops or anything like that. So what we want to do is here is actually, and I can spend a couple of minutes explaining kind of the motivation. It's not just to say something about corruption, but it's an attempt to understand the engines of growth that are not strictly economic. So when you do growth theory in economics, you think about human capital, accumulation, you think about physical capital, you think about invention and innovation, you think about quality ladders, you think about creative destruction. All these are things that permit you to accumulate more factors of production or to improve the technology. So here, the attempt is, when you put these factors on the right-hand side of the growth regression, you only explained half of growth or less. Most of the growth you explain is through changes in TFP. So because you're not explaining the growth very well, growth regressions use funny variables on the right-hand side, dummy variables like a continental dummy, ethno-linguistic diversity, all these kind of non-economic or cultural terms being used, or variables. And so what we want to understand is, if we lay aside human capital accumulation, if we lay aside physical capital accumulation, what else is there? Okay? So it's an attempt to understand the non-economic factors that underlie the growth process, in particular institutions and culture. So what we're going to do is, as first step, we're going to fix the institutions and, in this case, property rights, take them as exogenous, and then see how people line up. What do people choose? So if I give you good institutions or bad institutions, what difference does that make in your occupational choices? And through these choices, what difference does it make on GDP? So if we have, for instance, complete enforcement of property rights versus no enforcement of property rights, what difference would it make? Is it 1%? Is it 50%? Is it 100%? What is it? So you learn something from this, and then you understand something about productivity, and look at the steady states, etc. So you kind of look at growth, taking institutions as exogenous. And then the second step would be to make a binary choice between institutions, status quo versus a random proposal. So that's what we're going to do. The important reason for doing this work is, as I said earlier, to try to identify proxies for corrupt activity and for rent-seeking. Because it's not enough to have your score by Transparency International is 5.5, and 2 years ago it was 5.6. It would be nice to know what fraction of GDP changes hands in this manner. And then it would be nice to know under what circumstances reform is kind of feasible and it's not feasible. To understand that kind of, if you like, that why was Singapore able to reform itself and grow? And why has Argentina found it impossible to reform itself in the last 60 years and Europe in the last 20 or 30? So I want to understand these things, if that's possible. So here's the model. I'm going to go through the model kind of relatively quickly. I'm going to give you the outlines of the model, and then try to get you into the politics, see how the political choices are made of strong institutions versus weak ones. So there's going to be a standard overlapping generations economy, actually economies, I should say. It's an open economy, so because you're trying to identify the impact of political and social factors on growth, we will limit the amount of economic heterogeneity in the model. In fact, the simplest version of the model, countries are going to be, the economics is going to be the same all over the world. So think of a bunch of identical countries, okay? The same endowments, the same technology, the same preferences, the same everything. And on top of that, think of these economies as being small and open, so that they face the same factor prices as well. So there's going to be perfect capital mobility, no labor mobility. Same technology means that we have the same marginal product of capital, same interest rate all over the world, same wage rate. It's kind of ridiculous, but if you want to talk about non-economic factors underlying growth, it's a convenient assumption. All right, so common factor prices. So whatever you do, whatever institutions you choose, whatever you do in your own country, you cannot affect wages or factor prices at all. Take this as given. All right. So each country will choose occupations. In each country, people choose occupations given factor prices, institutions, and social norms. So if here we inherit something from the past, we inherit something of the world economy, and also we inherit some institutions from the past. So now we choose occupations. Who's going to be honest? Who's going to be dishonest? Layer 2 is once we do the occupation choice bit, then each country can change, each period, we can change the inherited institutions by a supermajority. So we have some institutions from the past. We have a random draw from a distribution, and we can switch institutions, or we can continue the status quo. Okay. And then once all this is done, at the deepest level, factor prices, incomes, and saving investment,